The auction yard buzzed with noise, a mixture of shouting men, stamping hooves, and the clatter of wooden gates. Dust swirled in the late afternoon sun, catching in the throats of bidders and animals alike. Among the restless horses and sturdy mules stood a donkey, thin to the point of frailty, his ribs showing under a patchy, dirt-stained coat. His left ear hung lower than the right, torn at the edge as if by some long-forgotten fight, and a faint limp made every movement painful to watch. No one gave him more than a passing glance. Buyers leaned toward the stronger beasts, assessing muscle and energy, while laughter rose whenever the donkey stumbled. He lowered his head, ears twitching at the noise. The chain around his neck tugged when the handler pulled him forward. His hooves dragged, unwilling yet forced. He had known nothing but harsh hands for as long as memory reached, and this place was no different. People's eyes slid over him, without care. Some whispered words that made others chuckle, useless, worthless, scrap. The donkey did not understand their language, but he understood tone, and the tone cut deeper than whips. The auctioneer's voice boomed above the crowd. Next up, this donkey here. Let's start the bidding at 50. He gestured toward the animal with exaggerated flourish, but his smile wavered when silence followed. No hands rose. 40 then, he tried again, his tone already slipping from confidence to impatience. The donkey shifted his weight, his limp pronounced, and a ripple of laughter moved through the onlookers. Someone shouted, "I wouldn't take him for free." Another added, "Not worth the hay it'd take to feed him." The auctioneer's face reddened. He sighed, wiped his brow, and dropped the number further. $10. Anyone? 10. Still no movement. The donkey's sides heaved with each breath, dust clinging to his nostrils. His eyes, once a soft brown, looked dull now, as if even hope had been stripped away. Finally, the auctioneer said, almost grudgingly, $1 then. Surely someone. His words stopped when a quiet voice from the back of the crowd answered. 1. It was not shouted. It was spoken with calm certainty, and it carried across the yard like a stone dropped into still water. Heads turned, searching for the bidder. Near the edge of the crowd stood a man in worn clothes, his hat pulled low against the sun. He looked older than his years, his hands rough with work. He did not seem the type to make spectacle, and yet here he was, bidding on what no one else wanted. A ripple of disbelief passed through the buyers. $1? For that wreck, someone scoffed. Another muttered, waste of money. The auctioneer hesitated, almost embarrassed to complete the sale. But rules were rules. Sold for $1. The gavel struck, a sharp crack that felt like both ending and beginning. The donkey was pulled from a platform, stumbling as the rope jerked at his neck. The crowd lost interest quickly, turning to the next lot, their voices rising in eager competition once more. Only the man who had bid remained focused on the donkey. He stepped forward, took the rope gently from the handler, and knelt slightly to meet the animal's lowered gaze. "You're coming with me now," he said softly. His voice carried no mockery, no impatience, only steady kindness. The donkey blinked, uncertain. The man's name was Elias. For years, he had lived on a modest farm just beyond the edge of town, a place where fields stretched wide and silence fell heavy after sunset. He had not intended to buy an animal that day. He had come only to watch, perhaps to see if fortune offered something useful for the work waiting back home. Yet when his eyes had fallen on the battered donkey, something in him had stirred, something he could not ignore. Elias had known what it meant to be dismissed, to be overlooked, to be considered less than others. He carried his own scars, though few could see them. Once he had stood proud in another life, but hardship had stripped much away. He had learned that worth could not always be measured by strength or appearance. That truth had guided his hand when others laughed. He led the donkey slowly out of the yard. The rope was slack, no force behind it, only invitation. The animal resisted at first, hooves digging into the dirt, but Elias waited with patience. "Take your time," he murmured. A few curious eyes followed them as they passed the gates, but soon even those lost interest. The road stretched ahead, bathed in the fading light of evening. Elias walked with an easy stride, his boots scuffing the ground. Beside him, the donkey limped, head still low, uncertain of this new master. Each step seemed to question whether cruelty would come again. Elias spoke now and then, quiet words meant not for command, but for comfort. "You're safe enough now. No one's going to laugh at you here." The donkey flicked his ears, not fully understanding, but sensing tone. There was no sharpness, no threat. As they passed beyond the noise of the auction, silence grew, broken only by the rhythmic tread of boots and hooves. The air cooled, carrying the scent of earth and grass. For the first time in a long while, the donkey was not shoved or mocked. He simply walked, free from urgency. The farm lay still a distance away, but already Elias felt the decision settle in his chest like a weight both heavy and right. He did not know if this animal could ever work the fields, if strength could return to that frail frame. But he had not bought a servant. He had bought a chance for both of them. They reached a bend where the horizon flared gold with the setting sun. Elias stopped, resting his hand lightly on the donkey's neck. The animal flinched, but did not pull away. Slowly, Elias bent closer, his words low and steady. "I don't know your story," he said, "but I know you've got more left than they think. We'll find it, you and I." The donkey stood still, breathing unevenly. Somewhere deep inside, beyond the fear and weariness, something stirred, a flicker so faint it could be mistaken for nothing. But it was there. Elias straightened, gave the rope the gentlest tug, and continued walking. The donkey followed, hesitant but willing. Behind them, the auction yard's noise faded into memory, replaced by the quiet promise of an unknown path. Night would soon fall, and with it new challenges, but for now, one truth carried them forward. Neither man nor beast was as broken as the world believed. The path to Elias's farm wound between fields that stretch bare at this season, the soil dark and waiting for the next planting. The donkey limped beside him, each uneven step echoing the weakness of his frame. When the farmhouse came into view, its weathered boards glowing faintly in the twilight, the donkey paused, nostrils flaring at scents of hay, chickens, and smoke from the chimney. A dog barked in the distance, sharp but not unfriendly, and the donkey's ears twitched nervously. Elias did not hurry him. He slowed his own stride, speaking low. "This is home. Not much, but enough." His voice had a rhythm to it, like wind brushing through wheat, calm and steady. The donkey moved again, uncertain but guided by that sound more than the slack rope. The farm was modest, with fences leaning in places and tools worn smooth from use. Chickens clucked as they scurried from the newcomers, and a pair of goats watched from their pen with cautious eyes. The donkey's hooves scuffed against the packed earth of the yard, and he shifted uncomfortably, unused to such open stillness. Elias led him to the small stable, its door creaking on rusty hinges. Inside, the scent of straw and old wood lingered. A stall stood ready, not fine or polished, but clean. Elias spread fresh hay in a corner, set a bucket of water down, and loosened the rope. The donkey remained frozen, muscles tense, unsure if this was trap or mercy. "Go on," Elias encouraged, stepping back. "It's yours." The donkey's dark eyes flicked to the water, then to Elias, then back again. Hunger gnawed at his ribs, thirst cracked his lips, but memory of harsh hands kept him rooted. Elias didn't push. He simply set his lantern on a beam and busied himself with quiet chores, moving without suddenness, never forcing the animal's choice. Minutes passed. At last, the donkey lowered his head, sniffed the bucket, and drank. The sound of slurping water filled the stall, loud in the still night. Elias glanced over, but did not smile too wide, careful not to make triumph into pressure. He only murmured, "That's it. That's better." When the donkey finished, he retreated to the far corner, lying down heavily on the straw. His body trembled from exhaustion more than cold. Elias covered him with a thin blanket, rough but warm, then left the stable door ajar so the air would flow. That first night was restless. The donkey shifted often, waking at creaks and shadows, haunted by phantoms of lashes and hunger. Each time, he found the silence of the farm waiting, the absence of cruelty more confusing than its presence. Sleep came in broken pieces, like fragile glass scattered on the floor. Morning brought pale lights spilling over the horizon. Elias returned with a pail of oats, the steam of his breath visible in the crisp air. The donkey eyed him warily. Elias set the food down and backed away. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, drawn by needs stronger than fear, the donkey crept forward and ate. The crunch of grain seemed impossibly loud. Elias only nodded. Days passed in such slow patterns. Elias never rushed the animal, never raised his hand in command. Instead, he worked nearby, mending fences, splitting wood, humming low songs as he moved. Sometimes he spoke, sharing thoughts as if to a companion. How the soil needed rain, how the goats had taken to mischief, how the town would soon gather for market. The donkey listened with one ear, not understanding words, but understanding tone. The cadence carried no threat. Trust did not arrive quickly. When Elias first tried to brush the matted fur, the donkey flinched, striking the stall with a kick born of memory. Elias stepped back, steady and calm. "It's all right. We'll try another time." He did not scold. And so another day came, another attempt, until the brush touched skin, without panic. In these small victories, Elias found satisfaction. Where others sought profit, he sought progress measured in breaths and glances. The donkey began to stand when Elias entered, not out of fear, but expectation. One evening, he even took a step forward without being led. Elias's chest tightened with quiet pride. Yet shadows lingered. The donkey woke often at night, eyes wide, body shaking. Once a storm rolled over the valley, thunder splitting the air. The donkey bolted within the stall, slamming against wood until splinters flew. Elias rushed in, catching the rope, but he did not fight to hold him down. He simply wrapped his arms around the animal's neck and whispered through the roaring thunder, words steady as stone. "Easy now. I'm here. No one's going to hurt you." Slowly, the donkey stilled, his sides heaving like bellows, until at last he leaned against Elias's chest, too weary to resist. In that moment, something fragile but real was born. Elias sat in the straw beside him long after the storm passed, his clothes soaked, his muscles stiff. He did not move until the donkey slept, and even then, he rose quietly, reluctant to disturb the fragile trust. The days stretched into weeks. Strength returned bit by bit, visible in the firmer step, the clearer eyes, the flick of ears at sounds once ignored. Elias began short walks with him through the fields, rope loose between them. The donkey followed, at first sluggish, then with more steadiness. Each step was practice, each path a lesson in freedom. Neighbors noticed, some with raised brows, some with laughter. "You wasted $1, one said at the market. "That beast will never work." Elias did not argue. He carried home his supplies, his face unreadable, but in his eyes lay quiet defiance. One afternoon, after tending the goats, Elias sat near the stable, his back against the wooden wall. He looked at the donkey standing quietly inside, chewing hay, and spoke as if to himself. "I was cast aside once too. Different reasons, but the same. People said I'd never find my footing again." He paused, fingers tracing the scar that curved along his forearm. "But worth isn't given by them. It's found piece by piece. And I think you're more than they'll ever know." The donkey lifted his head, meeting Elias's gaze through the slats. For a brief instant, the air between them felt alive, heavy with something unspoken. Not understanding, not yet trust, but recognition. That evening, as dusk painted the horizon red, Elias led the donkey beyond the yard for the first time. They walked to the crest of a hill where fields stretched endless, the world wide, and waiting. The donkey stopped, ears forward, eyes reflecting the sky's fire. Elias stood beside him, silent, letting the moment breathe. The farm behind them was small, the world ahead uncertain. Yet here they stood, man and beast both scarred, both searching. Elias rested his hand lightly on the donkey's shoulder, and this time the animal did not flinch. The future remained unwritten, but the path had begun. The weeks slipped into months, and the donkey's transformation became visible, though never swift. His ribs no longer jutted like broken beams, his coat gained a faint sheen beneath Elias's careful brushing, and the limp that once defined every step softened into something less painful. Yet scars did not vanish easily, not from body nor memory. The donkey still hesitated at sudden sounds, still tensed when shadows moved too quickly, still carried the weight of old wounds. Elias understood. He never measured progress in leaps, but in inches. He rose each dawn, tended the land, and returned to the stable with patience stitched into every gesture. Some evenings he sang in a low, weathered voice as he repaired tools, songs without grand melody, but steady enough to calm the animal nearby. Trust grew in silence, in routine, in the absence of cruelty. But not everyone saw it so. Neighbors whispered when Elias came to town. At the blacksmith's, one man leaned close to another and muttered, still pouring time into that wreck. "Should have let it go." A woman at the market shook her head as Elias loaded grain. "All for a beast that'll never pull a cart. What sense is that?" Laughter followed, sharp and dismissive. Elias rarely answered. He only listened, his weathered face unreadable, his hands steady as they carried burdens heavier than words. Yet at night, when the fields lay quiet and the lantern burned low, doubts sometimes pressed against his chest. Could they be right? Was he clinging to something that could never heal? His eyes would drift to the donkey, standing calm in the stall, and the question would linger like a thorn. The first real test came on a morning thick with fog. Elias had a cart of firewood to haul to the far field, the distance too great for his own strength alone. He harnessed the donkey carefully, speaking low. "No weight you can't bear. Just enough to see if we're ready." The straps slid over worn fur, buckles tightened with patience. The donkey shifted, ears flicking, but did not fight. They set off slowly, hooves crunching frostbitten grass, wheels creaking under load. At first, the donkey leaned heavily, uncertain, each step hesitant. Elias walked beside him, hand on the reins but never pulling, murmuring encouragement. "Steady now." One step, then another. Halfway across the field, the cart snagged on a rut. The donkey froze, legs trembling. His ears pressed flat, breath quickened, old fear rising like smoke from embers. Elias placed his hand on the animal's shoulder. "Easy. You're not alone this time." He lifted part of the cart himself, easing the strain, and together they moved forward. By the time they reached the far fence, sweat streaked the donkey's coat, but the load had been carried. Elias's chest swelled with quiet pride. He brushed the animal down slowly, voice hushed with gratitude. "You did it. You gave me more than I asked." The donkey lowered his head against Elias's arm, not quite an embrace, but close enough. Word of the attempt spread quickly, though not with admiration. Some mocked the effort, saying it was folly to celebrate what stronger animals did daily without struggle. But a few noticed the glimmer of change, the stubbornness in Elias's faith. And one afternoon, when a child wandered close to the stable, curiosity bright in her eyes, the donkey did not shy away. She reached a small hand to stroke his muzzle, and he stood still, breathing warm against her palm. Her laughter rang across the yard, light and unafraid. Elias watched, his throat tight. That moment carried more weight than any cart. It was proof of gentleness restored, a sign that the past did not own the future. Yet challenges deepened. The season turned, bringing storms that battered the valley. One evening, rain poured heavy as sheets of steel, flooding part of the lower field. Fences strained under water's force, animals bleated in distress. Elias worked through the night, securing posts, hauling goats to higher ground. His body, already worn from years of labor, faltered under the strain. Fever followed, creeping slow but unrelenting. For days he lay in bed, strength drained, breath shallow. Chores piled heavy. Chickens scattered, goats strained at their pens, and the fields waited unworked. The donkey stood outside the farmhouse, restless, sensing the absence of routine. He pawed the earth, ears swiveling at every sound from inside. One morning, Elias forced himself from bed, weak but determined. He stepped into the yard, swaying, and lifted a small bundle of supplies to carry. His knees buckled, and the bundle spilled across the dirt. The donkey moved closer, watching him. Elias tried again, stubborn, but the weight was too much. He leaned against the fence, eyes clouded with pain. Slowly, almost uncertainly, the donkey lowered his head and nudged the bundle with his muzzle. Elias stared, breath catching. The animal nosed it again, as if urging Elias to place it across his back. Trembling, Elias lifted the supplies and set them there. The donkey bore the weight without faltering, standing tall despite the memory of weakness. Together, they carried the load across the yard. Elias walked slowly, leaning on the fence posts for balance, but the donkey moved steady, burden secure. For the first time, it was not Elias guiding the donkey. It was the donkey carrying Elias's need. That evening, as Elias rested in the stable's straw, too weary to return inside, he whispered, "I knew you had it in you." His voice cracked, but his eyes shone with pride. The donkey lowered himself beside him, a quiet guardian in the shadows. Word of Elias's illness and the donkey's strange loyalty reached town. The same voices that once mocked began to soften, curiosity replacing scorn. "Perhaps there's more to that beast than we thought," one man admitted at the tavern. A woman who had laughed before now said, "Strange how he follows Elias like shadow to sun." Doubt had not vanished, but cracks formed in its walls. As Elias's strength slowly returned, so did the work of the farm. The donkey stood ready each morning, no longer the creature dragged by rope, but one who chose to walk beside his master. Their bond deepened into something beyond ownership, something forged in struggle and patience. One late afternoon, Elias leaned against the fence, watching the sun sink into the fields. The donkey stood near, ears flicking lazily at insects. Elias's voice was soft, meant only for the two of them. They don't see it yet, but I do. You're not broken. You're a fighter, and when the time comes, you'll show them all. The donkey turned his head, meeting Elias's gaze with eyes no longer dull but alive with something new. It was not yet triumph, but it was strength, and it was waiting. The valley would test them again soon, in ways neither could predict. But for now, man and beast stood together against the fading light, their shadows long across the earth, their story only beginning to rise toward its reckoning. The valley woke one morning to chaos. A storm had broken in the night, fierce and unrelenting, tearing across the hills with winds that bent trees and rains that turned paths into rivers. The river that ran along the far edge of the village had swollen past its banks, dragging debris in its furious current. Houses closest to the water stood half-flooded, animals scattered, families shouting above the roar. In the midst of it all came the cry that chilled every heart: a child was missing. The villagers gathered on the bank, fear gripping them as the current surged. The girl had been seen near the far pasture before the storm grew wild, and now her tracks led toward the flooded fields beyond. No one dared cross. The mud swallowed boots, the current tore at every step, and the distance was too great to cover with carts or horses. Even the strongest men shook their heads. Elias arrived late, his breath ragged from hurrying down the hillside. The donkey followed, rope loose between them, his coat darkened with rain. The crowd parted with uneasy glances. Some remembered the laughter of months past, the jeers at the auction yard. Others whispered of the strange bond they had since witnessed. Elias said nothing at first. His eyes swept the raging water, then the terrified faces. "She's alive," one woman sobbed, pointing toward a tree half submerged in the distance. Clinging to its trunk, pale against the storm's fury, was the child. Her cries carried faintly across the water, desperate and thin. Every second the flood rose higher, the tree bending under the strain. Elias felt his chest tighten. He knew he could not reach her himself. His strength had never fully returned. The villagers argued, some urging patience, others calling for ropes or rafts that did not exist. Time slipped away, and with it the child's chances. Then Elias's gaze fell to the donkey beside him. The animal stood steady despite the chaos, ears flicking but eyes fixed on Elias, as if waiting. The thought came unbidden, impossible and yet undeniable. He rested his hand on the donkey's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the drenched coat. "They laughed at you once," Elias murmured, low enough that only the donkey heard. "But they'll see now. If you can do this, they'll see." The villagers caught the intent in his eyes. Murmurs rose at once. "He can't mean. That beast will drown out there. It's madness." Elias ignored them. He tightened the rope, not to control but to guide, and stepped into the water with the donkey at his side. The current hit hard, swirling cold around their legs, but the donkey braced himself, muscles taut, hooves finding grip in the sucking mud. Step by step they moved forward, Elias urging softly, "Steady, boy." One step, then the next. The child's cries grew louder, more frantic. Halfway across, the current surged stronger, slamming debris into the donkey's flank. He staggered, nearly falling, but Elias's voice cut through the storm. "Hold fast. You're not broken. You never were." The donkey snorted, eyes flashing, and pressed forward again, each step carved from will alone. At last they reached the tree. The girl clung with tiny arms, shivering, her face streaked with tears and rain. Elias reached for her, voice breaking. "It's all right. Come with us." But the water surged higher, the tree groaning, and the child froze in terror. The donkey moved closer on his own, pressing his body against the current until Elias could lift the girl onto his back. She clutched the animal's mane, sobbing into the wet fur. The donkey shifted under the new weight, but did not falter. Elias clung to his side, guiding them back toward the shore. The return was harder. The current fought them with fury, dragging at every step. Twice the donkey stumbled, hooves sliding, but each time he pushed up again, driven by something deeper than instinct. Elias whispered encouragements between gasps, his words nearly swallowed by wind. "You're stronger than they know. Just a little further. Don't give in now." The villagers watched in silence, hearts caught between dread and awe. Slowly, impossibly, the figures drew closer, the man, the beast, and the child. When at last they reached shallower ground, hands rushed forward to pull the girl to safety. She was weeping but alive. Her mother clutched her tight, her gratitude spilling into tears. And then, for the first time, the villagers looked at the donkey not with laughter, but with wonder. Mud-caked, trembling, drenched from ears to tail, he stood tall, sides heaving, eyes bright with fire that had once been buried deep. The crowd murmured, voices shifting from disbelief to admiration. Elias leaned against him, exhausted, one hand gripping the wet rope, the other resting on the donkey's neck. His voice was hoarse, but steady with pride. $1, he said quietly. That's all it took. $1 for a life worth more than any of yours could measure. The villagers fell silent, shame heavy in their eyes. Some bowed their heads, others looked away, but a few stepped forward, hands tentative in gratitude. Children reached out, touching the donkey's legs, their laughter pure, untainted by scorn. The donkey did not shy away. He stood calm, as if he finally understood he had nothing left to fear. That night, the farm was quiet again. The storm had passed, leaving the air sharp and clean, stars glittering above like shattered glass. Elias stood in the stable, brushing the donkey's damp coat with slow strokes. The animal leaned into the touch, not with hesitation, but with trust earned beyond measure. "You gave them more than they deserved to see," Elias whispered. His eyes glistened in the lantern light. "But you gave me everything I ever needed to believe again." The donkey flicked his ears, lowering his head until it rested lightly against Elias's chest. For a moment, man and beast stood as one, the silence between them deeper than words. In the days that followed, the story spread across the valley. No longer was the donkey called broken or useless. Children pointed to him with awe. Neighbors greeted Elias with respect, and whispers of mockery were replaced by tales of courage. Yet for Elias, none of that mattered as much as the bond that had carried them through. He often returned to the hillside at dusk, standing with the donkey at his side, both watching the horizon flame gold. The world would always hold storms, doubts, and trials, but together they had proven something unshakable. Worth was never defined by judgment, but by resilience, by trust, by the will to rise when the world expected only failure. The donkey pawed the earth, ears forward, no longer beaten, but alive with spirit. Elias smiled faintly, his heart full. "Run if you want to," he said softly. "You've earned it." The donkey leapt forward, hooves drumming against the earth, mane catching the last light of the setting sun. For the first time, he ran not from pain, not from fear, but from joy. Elias watched, pride swelling in his chest, knowing this was freedom reborn. And in the quiet that followed, the valley seemed to whisper the truth neither laughter nor doubt could erase. Sometimes the smallest chance, the lowest price, the forgotten soul, can hold the greatest strength of all.